Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War breaking news update for the 5th of January 2025. And we are hearing that the Ukrainians are mounting, I don't know whether to call this a counter-offensive, certainly some larger scale attacks within the Kursk region and potentially outside of the Kursk region as well, possibly around Tetkino, too, which is just over here. If you remember the whole Kursk sector, that did go up to around there. It was up to Koronevo, so that whole area. They've lost all of this ground here. They were fighting beneath the river here towards Glushkovo. That seems to have failed. They did take part of the river, the same river that comes down here, with bridges that were blown up over it. They did sort of have some success around Tetkino and the other side of the river here, controlling the land there. Relatively easy to do that. The Russians pulling back from there. But it could be that the Ukrainians are also pushing into Tetkino as well. But a lot of the activity is taking place around Martinovka up towards Bolshoye Soldatskoye there, as well as over here, Leonidivka or Leonidovo, depending on how you write it, around here. And this is the area Malaya Lokhnya, which is just there. Malaya Lokhnya is the area that the Russians have been pushing towards, and they've had some success in taking back. North Koreans being very active around this part, taking back land and squeezing the Ukrainians here. But the Ukrainians have been making the Russians pay an awful lot for the land they've retaken. But when it comes down to those being largely North Koreans in that area, the Russians don't care so much, I would have thought. So, a major offensive by the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kursk operation zone is not a rumor, says War Translated. Fighting is underway, and the Ukrainians have achieved some successes. Let's wish the warriors good luck. And we are seeing quite a bit of footage of armored convoys moving in the area. No Reports has a thread on it. After a while, Ukraine is taking back momentum into Kursk and has reportedly started offensive operations according to Russian sources. The Ukrainian moves towards the settlement of Bolshoye Soldatskoye there. That's up this Martinivka road that they have been fighting up and down for some time. If we go back to No Report, so that is what they're saying there. Some reports coming out from Russians. He continues, more visual confirmation of what is reported as Ukrainian forces attacking in the Kursk region. The axis of attack is towards Pushkarnoye, an area where Russians recently pushed Ukraine back a bit. And that is in the area we're just sort of talking about, as they're pushing up to Bolshoye Soldatskoye. There, Pushkarnoye is in this area, further to the south, around sort of the southeast of Martinivka. Okay, we go back to where we were. According to Russian sources, Ukrainian units have taken control over the village of Berdin in the Kursk region, although this is disputed by some other channels, and that is in the direction of, going back up here, the direction of Bolshoye Soldatskoye. There, Berdin, I think, is here. Yeah, I think that's Berdin. That village there may or may not have been taken by the Ukrainians as they are pushing back. Head of the Ukrainian presidential office, Andriy Yermak, also adds to the ongoing actions. Quote, Kursk, good news, Russia is getting what it deserved, he writes. Several Russian sources claim that there is an ongoing offensive coming from Leonidovo as well in the on the western side of the Kursk region. So reportedly attacking in that area too. That is just back over here, if you remember, attacking in that area. So this map from Andrew is not quite up to date, as in he will no doubt have an update coming forthwith. Concerning these activities is obviously going to be very dynamic today. A more visual confirmation says no reports of what is reported as a Ukrainian armored column breaking through, or armored columns breaking through positions in the Kursk region. There are no clear reports about success yet, as the Russians are denying it en masse. Obviously, to do to send large columns of armored vehicles into the contact line area is very risky for the Ukrainians. Russians have done that, and they've been absolutely hammered by drones. This could mean that there is an asymmetry of drone activity. It could mean that the Ukrainians do have the drone and electronic warfare advantage in the area if they are confident enough to drive these large columns in, or it's just crazy that they're doing that. But I would have thought they'd put some thought into this. The other thing is that I've talked about where they can attack, because they will need the art of surprise to be evident in any sort of attack they do anywhere. And that's really, really difficult because the Russians are getting ready for an attack. So I guess piling resources and troops into an area you're already really active in is easier for the Ukrainians, because it just looks like what you're normally doing. It's just that you've got more. If they started amassing huge numbers of troops over here, then the Russians would know that, and they'll be thinking, right, the Ukrainians are going to attack across the border over here. Whereas if they're where you would expect troops to be anyway, then that's all right. So I had said that if they do mount any other rather large, I doubt this is particularly massive. This is just going to be as many resources as they can afford to put into Kursk. They are doing so, but otherwise I would have expected attacks somewhere else across the border rather than piling those resources into the front lines down here. If it's about, it depends what the objectives are. If your objectives are regaining momentum and making the Russians react, it's exactly the same rationale for the attacking Kursk in the first place. You've seen a lot of argument coming out recently, or statements from Zelensky, that Kursk has been really important, has been a success, and in fact it's an important bargaining chip going forward. And so they won't want to lose this. So with the North Koreans coming on board and the Russians piling on pressure in the Kursk region, you either keep it or you don't. Or you attack somewhere else to alleviate Kursk, but across the border still. And that may also be part of the plan here. There have been some rumors that the Ukrainians may be getting ready to attack across the border elsewhere. We just heard about Tetkino as well. Well, you just heard that from me, but I've seen that in a few places. Okay, let's go back to Null reports. Russian aviation is very actively engaged in trying to repel the Ukrainian attacks in the Kursk region at the moment. So you can see lots of those trails in the air of the Russian aviation doing its thing, or trying to do its thing. And more footage from Ukrainian columns trying to advance into Russian positions in the Kursk region. Russian channels report heavy fighting near or in Berdin, as we've mentioned. Ukrainian volunteer and activist Serhiy Stenenko, who does a lot of fundraising, reports that at the same time Russians are attacking across the state border of Ukraine in the Sumy region. So Russians are attacking. In fact, we have heard that the Russians did have some deep reconnaissance groups going across the Sumy border, and shot up a car of brother and sister who were living just 5 kilometers from the front line. Absolutely raped it with machine gun ammunition, and it's just sad sight there. So there is possibly just deep reconnaissance groups, but I don't know that it's anything bigger than that. Anyway, quote, while there is no significant advancement yet, there's a trend towards increased efforts, he said. Ukrainian forces have launched an offensive, no reports then, continues in the Kursk region, says Russian mill blogger Kotanok. Quote, the enemy is advancing near Sudzha and Berdino, Bolshoy, Solatskoye and Pushkarnoye, but is sustaining losses. The situation remains tense, with no clear indication on the main attack direction. So it could be that the Ukrainians are sustaining losses, because at the end of the day, they are going to be attacking into Russian-controlled territory, and you'd expect the Russians to put up a stiff defense. Air defense is also reportedly very active in the Kursk region. Traces of Russian air defense chasing a Ukrainian air target. Russian channels about the situation near Berdin, quote, in the direction of Bolshoy Solatskoye, Ukrainians landed 70 people in the forest. The guys are working. Many should not run ahead of the locomotive. There is a lot of disinformation. The situation is difficult. don't know what to make of that. This is sounding familiar, says No reports a Russian channel about the current actions in the Kursk region. There is no need to panic and sow discouragement in the Kursk region. There are military actions here. It happens that somewhere we are advancing, somewhere we are retreating in order to win a big battle. Russian channels show Ukrainian columns on the move in Kursk. And according to Russian sources, Ukrainian units are also attacking towards Tetkino. That's what I mentioned earlier, Kursk region. The village sits right on the border with Ukraine, surrounded by the same river. In the initial stage of the Kursk operation, Ukraine tried to encircle it by blowing up the bridges, but failed. Up until now, although there's still the fog of war, Russians have confirmed Ukrainian units landed in the forest south of Berdin. Situation might look something like this, he says. Whether Berdin is captured by Ukrainian forces is still unclear. And then to counter advancing Russian forces in the Kursk direction, Ukrainian troops launched a counterattack at around 9 a.m. Moscow time, according to the Russian MOD. So that's the Russian MOD official line. Russian channel Don't Stop War, that speaks disparagingly about other channels when it comes to telling the truth. Quote, now you can say they didn't come in then, but they came in now. Or you said they took it, but they just came in. End quote. They didn't come in to Sudzha for a whole week either. So I'm not quite sure what that means, really. Vladimir Novikov, a pro-Russian militia leader and commander of the Troy detachment, has said, quote, the Ukrainian armed forces offensive in the Kursk region has some tactical successes. They have finally entered the Berdin farmstead and are trying to encircle the village of Tetkino. And more Ukrainian columns are seen on this video that No Reports shares in the Kursk region on the move. Russian forces are actively complaining about the extensive use of electronic warfare on the Ukrainian side, making their drones useless. And that's important. You cannot do attacks like this. Attacks like this are insane unless you have cleared the air of enemy drones. They call for the supply of fiber optic drones, the Russians there. An example of Ukraine's strong use of electronic warfare in the Kursk region attacked right now. Quote, very serious work of the enemy's electronic warfare systems installed on the vehicles going into the breakthrough. In such situations, the work of FPV drones on fiber optics are needed. So here's one that a Russian drone getting near to a Ukrainian vehicle and then just suddenly cuts out as the electronic warfare messes with the feed. And then just a few more. A Russian soldier awaiting what is coming in the Kursk region. Quote, the enemy went on a breakthrough. We will wait, endure, and destroy. So very positive there from the Russian. Lots of footage, as I've mentioned, of the advances going on. You can see them all over the socials. Here we have a Russian, quote, Kursk region, Bolshoi Solotskoye. Judging by the situation in the Sudzha area, so that's the general area. Sudzha is that larger urban area there. The enemy offensive we spoke about earlier has begun. It started from Sudzha towards Bolshoi Solotskoye. Although we considered this direction the most difficult for the enemy, in the offensive, the enemy uses mine-clearing trawls, tanks, and other armoured vehicles. The enemy has covered the attack area with electronic warfare, so many drones are useless. It is possible that the enemy will try to break through in other directions. Our units are ready and are meeting the enemy with counterfire. And another Russian source says, Kursk direction offensive of the armed forces of Ukraine. The enemy uses IMRS, clears roads, and drives in armoured fighting vehicles and infantry fighting vehicles. They're climbing from Martinivka to Pushkarnoye. Bars are meeting the enemy. So bars are the reserve forces from the Russians. An offensive is underway from Sudzha towards Bolshoi Solotskoye. There's also an offensive in Leonidovo. Paratroopers are fighting. I presume that means Russian paratroopers in response. Now, Mick Ryan, a retired Australian general, says it will be interesting to watch how this develops. First reports are generally wrong or inaccurate, so it will take perhaps 24 to 48 hours to have a good sense of what's occurring in this new offensive by Ukraine. Head of CPD Kovalenko, Ukrainian, says the Russians in Kursk region are in great distress because they were attacked from several directions and it came as a surprise to them. And Andriy Yermak, as mentioned, Kursk region, good news, Russia is getting what it deserves. So I guess we'll have to wait and see to get better sense of what's going on. Some Russians are claiming the Ukrainians' goal is to get to the Kursk nuclear power plant. I doubt that is going to be even remotely achievable. That was touted in the original counteroffensive, but in order to do that, you've got to get all the way up here, and that's just simply not. I don't think that's remotely realistic. It's a bit like saying, well, they're planning. The Ukrainians were planning on getting to Tokmak and Melitopol in the 2023 counteroffensive. It didn't remotely get near there, and Russians will kind of blow up the the intentions to kind of an unrealistic degree. I would have thought it could be through panic, could be through whatever psyops they're planning on to, but I doubt the Ukrainians would remotely have the resources to do that. My guess is the maximal intentions would be to secure the Kursk salient so that after January the 20th, they still have a really strong hold on an area here, and they are unlikely to lose it to an increased Russian attack, and possibly give the Russians something to think about elsewhere. So I would try, and I know it's like cutting your forces, but I'd give the Russians something to think about elsewhere as well. But you know, I'm no expert, as I'm sure you are aware. And the final thing to say, just I thought this is obviously not to do with the Kursk. This is Kinburn Spit. The Russians saying not everything is as good as it seems. So just to remind you where the Kinburn Spit is, we're going all the way down here to this area. You've got the peninsula and then the spit just coming up here. Sometimes people call this whole area the Kinburn Spit. It's not technically correct. The spit is just that part there. Nonetheless, we do have this claim. The guys from the 61st Separate Brigade asked to publish, so this is a Russian source, Kinburn, Kherson region. I am publishing without editing. The number of losses has increased dramatically over the past few weeks. Commanders are constantly pressuring us and sending us on pointless assaults. Most of us understand this is tantamount to suicide. In such a situation, many began to look for ways to avoid this meat grinder. Some people feign illness, invent non-existent diagnoses, and some even shoot themselves in the arms or legs. The number of 500s can be kept silent about afterwards. 200s are dead, 300s wounded, 500s are probably deserters. Before the assaults, a mandatory report on the completion of articles on criminal liability. We are in hell here. And that's all the way down here. It sounds like attacks, and they're not going to be attacking. So I wonder what's going on there. Are these attacks from the peninsula here into the delta? So rather than the spit, this could be actually talking about the peninsula, attacks into the islands here that we've seen lots of boats pile up on the loss lists recently. It could be that the Ukrainians are giving the Russians a hard time in this area. I doubt this is saying anything about potential attacks, although I have wondered for a long time. You know, the Ukrainians did try this once or twice. They've landed on this bit, the Tendritska Spit, is it? Down here. And they've tried to do a number of different attacks at different times, and they've broadly failed. I do wonder whether this is another area they could sort of mount an attack and keep the Russians on their toes. Nonetheless, the main news is of course, the Kursk region, where the Ukrainians are mounting a significant attack, it seems, today. We knew they were gearing up for something, or at least we didn't know they had announced they were, and I do wonder about Ukrainians announcing stuff in advance. I don't know what the point of that would be, but we were under the impression something was going to happen, and it appears that they are piling into Kursk. It seems that Kursk is that important to them. The calculation is it's far more important that they keep this Russian land than they don't lose Ukrainian land. So they are really seeing Kursk as far more valuable than their own territory in the Pokrovsk region. That's how I would interpret this. Anyway, let me know what you think, and I'll get on with my hits and losses video. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.